what I feel is missing is part of the dialogue that's happening in the creation of them. Now, I don't have that inside view to know exactly how they're making decisions, but it doesn't feel to me like it's being designed with the beginner's mind in mind. One, it's being designed generally by extraordinary experts, people who understand how these tools function better than anyone outside of the companies.
Highly technical people.
Highly technical people. And their ultimate goal, in a large part, is not about making a tool that works for you and me. It's about making a tool that will replace you and me. So why do they care how it works?
Hi, this is your PM Cowboy coming back with another podcast. We've had the wonderful privilege of having Helen Edwards on here recently for AI, and she made the mistake of dropping her husband's name. I was aware of him, and she mentioned what he's passionate about. He's also passionate about their common institute, the Artificiality Institute. And she mentioned that you were kind of specialized on the design factor, and my ears started ringing. I said, hey, bring him on. And she reached out to you, and Dave Edwards said yes. So today's guest is Dave Edwards. He's going to introduce himself in just a moment. We're going to be talking about, this is part of our artificial intelligence series that we're doing, where we're looking constructively critical at some of the facets that interest you viewers out there. And I think we've got a great topic, because I could spend hours talking to Dave. We've already tried that in the pre-talk, but we're going to try to hone in on, I think, what's relevant also for you guys out there who need to make decisions on AI is, are we victims of the AI movement, or do we have the liberty to actually say, what do we want AI for, and can we design a future that we can look forward to? So that's my intro, Dave. I don't know how good that was.
That's fantastic. Thank you very much for having me.
You already sound like AI. That was fantastic, Mark. Well, thanks a lot for coming online. I know you're a really busy person. What we do at the beginning of all of our podcasts is, and this is one of those things of mine, I always want to know who's talking there before I listen to what they say. And you've got a fascinating background, just like your wife Helen does. Can you tell our viewers a little bit about who you are, what your past is? I call it the passion journey. How did you end up where you are today, and what are your key concerns for the future?
Sure. So, well, definitely thanks for having me on. And even if that sounds like AI, it's because AI learned to say things like that. So I'm Dave Edwards. I'm co-founder of the Artificiality Institute with Helen. So hopefully your viewers have already experienced part of what we do. Our goal is to shape the human experience with AI and help people remain the author of their own minds. And we do that through researching how people experience the tools. What it feels like, what it does to their thinking, their sense making, their identity, and we research what it means to create better tools for us. So how might we create AI to systems that are for us and that don't extract from us?
So kind of a deterministic point of view. We don't have to just take everything that's thrown our way. We can shape the future of AI is kind of one of your focuses.
Sure, everything, nothing is inevitable, and nothing is completely controlled. It feels difficult right now. I mean, we're dealing with a small number of very powerful and wealthy companies that are choosing their own paths. But that doesn't mean that we have to, accept what they provide, and it also doesn't mean that we can't have input and tell companies what we really want and then see them change their paths. I mean, you asked about a passion journey, and it's very much connected to my passion journey, right? I think it was 1982. I first touched an Apple II and started to figure out what it was like to make stuff with a computer. And that expanded what I could do capability wise. I mean, I was excited to do this thing in BASIC called high-res graphics, where you could draw on a screen. For those who aren't old enough, this was prior to a GUI. But once computers got more advanced and everything else, I just became enamored with what it was possible to do with this thing called a bicycle for the mind, or at least that's how Steve Jobs referred to it. That passion journey of mine actually took me to Apple after some other things in my work life. And I ran a whole bunch of software products there in the early 2000s. And it was that's very much connected to what we do today. So we think about AI as something that can be shaped, something that should work for us. We no longer call it a bicycle for the mind. We call it a minds for our minds. But our passion journey is trying to help make technology that is good for us. And that feels hard right now. That feels like quite an uphill battle. But that's why we've created a nonprofit to hopefully get the support of others to provide the research required and show the world what it's like to make AI that can actually be good for humanity.
The thing that led me to follow you guys was Helen's very prolific on social media as well. You should follow her. What I just loved about her reels is, I don't know, I have a marketing background way in the back and have done sales, and I'm also familiar with NLP and different influence techniques and stuff like that. After a certain while, you get a feeling when people are bullshitting you. This is kind of like, don't bullshit a bullshitter. And what I loved about Helen is, in the moment she opened her mouth, it was profound. It was well thought through. So both of you have a great narrative style as well that kind of brings people in, because I think people are really suffering out there. I think, everybody's telling me in the United States, everybody's on board with AI and everybody's driving for AI and everybody has a clear path and strategy. I don't have the same feeling about that in Europe. I think there's a lot of lip service going on with companies. I think a lot of them are paying lip service and hoping to sit it out and maybe not be the first movers, but as soon as the first movers fail and you get your first lessons learned, maybe take those use cases and avoid the heavy costs that are involved. And I don't even think that strategy for some companies is such a bad idea before they invest in something that they don't understand. But I think the whole community is longing for people who have, like you know, who do the research, who know the studies, who have a more profound background. I mean, I was looking a little bit about your background. You went to Yale, and you got a bachelor's in history, if I'm not mistaken. Right. Yeah. Kind of reminded me a little bit of Steve Jobs, because a lot of people say, Steve Jobs was a programmer and engineer. No, he wasn't. He was I don't even know what his degree was, but his big specialty was fonts and design and things like that. And I think that's an ongoing discussion also in AI, is what is a good degree to face the challenge of AI. And I think we need, I think the humanistic perspective and the liberal arts perspective is key here, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, definitely. It's I did get a degree in history. I love history because it helps provide different lenses on how humans have interacted with each other and with the world in the past. There is no one single historical representation. I mean, history is gathers as much as you can possibly get your hands around, but when you're an historian, you know that it's not the complete truth, because you can't understand every other thing that's happening in the world. I wish I could remember off the top of my head, there's a great book about being an historian written by a history prof from Johns Hopkins in the last couple of years. And he did a great job of describing why that's true. And I bring it up because it's sort of, I think it's one of the things that drives me in terms of thinking about AI. There is this sort of idea that AI is all-knowing and omniscient and it knows everything, but it clearly doesn't. It's been trained on an extraordinary amount of information, but all of that information had been digitized. And there's only so much of the historical record of the planet that has been digitized. There is only so much of the historical knowledge of the planet that we even understand, so we could even describe. Everything from what's happening under the ground to describing the gesture you're making right now. Right. We think a lot about gestures. One of our advisors, Barbara Tversky, has done foundational work on this. And gestures are important. We think with gestures, we communicate with gestures. They aren't written down very easily or well, right? They aren't captured. So there's this whole part of what's happened in the past and how those patterns of the past might inform the future. But you have to have the humbleness to understand that this is not, what you know is not complete. So how can you find the value in what you do know as an historian, or what the model might know as a model, and put that in the context of all the other stuff that has been known or will need to be known that's not part of that study? And so how do you find those gaps and so forth? So I do think, sort of back to your sort of core point, humanities, I think, is extremely important because, well, we're humans. And I kind of like being human. I think that being a good human to each other and to the planet is an important thing. And so studying the humanities is how we understand it. So the interesting thing, there's a recent, we just put up a research piece yesterday that looks at labor and jobs and sort of gets at one of your questions here. So a lot of the work around labor and jobs has been done by looking at what's called the ONET database, an acronym that's part of the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics. It's sort of the canonical, for many decades, resource for understanding what people do at work across nearly, it's sort of 894 jobs or something like that. It's an extraordinary body of work. And 10 years ago, we did a deep dive and studied it to try and figure out where we thought AI might automate work. It was definitely the idea back then, was sort of the name that we were thinking about, and where it might not. And we flipped it around. We did an unusual thing, which was trying to show where work wouldn't be automated, and so where the sort of special parts are for humans. And we did that again this time, slightly differently. Partly 10 years ago, I was driving the analysis, and this time Helen was driving the analysis. So I have incredible respect for the incredible amount of work that she just did. But we came out of it with a different kind of idea. 10 years ago, we thought that the thing that you needed to know, the thing you should go study, the major you should have, as you were asking about in college, was to sort of think about something about unpredictability. So we looked at how you interact with physical spaces, or we called a category bugs and bad things, for epidemiologists, and a variety of things about unpredictability. What's interesting now is we look at that and we realize that we weren't necessarily wrong. We weren't wrong at the time. It's more that the platform, the technology shifted underneath us in a way that we didn't quite anticipate, which is that the machines now handle a lot of unpredictability. That's one of the things that generative AI can do, and agents can handle unpredictability. They are given a goal, they try a thing, they fail, they try another thing, they fail, they try another thing. They're dealing with this sort of unpredictable nature. It's different from humans and how we handle unpredictability, but there is something there. And that meant that line that we had drawn was a little bit different. Now we look at it and we think what we've discovered now is concept of irreducible complexity. So the things that machines are good at is things that can be broken down into bits, can be analyzed, can be verified, things that can be tested, where something can be reduced right down to its component parts. Sometimes those are predictable, sometimes they're not, but they can be broken down into parts. Then there's these other things where there's irreducible complexity because you're cutting across domains.
Are you familiar with the term wicked problems? Is that a term you use?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
It's a catchy phrase, and I like the concept behind it.
Yeah, definitely. I totally understand that too. It's you end up with these areas where you can't quite see across all of them. It isn't possible to reduce it. And it is one of the things that we as humans are really quite good at. So I won't try to, I won't go on for longer now because I can consume hours talking about what was, many tens of thousands of words piece of research, but you can find it on our website. It is quite interesting to look across it and look at this from the frame of jobs. So where are there jobs that have very high irreducibility, and why is that? Now, caveat for all of this when people look at it is everybody always looks up their own job, and you can go look up your own job and you'll have a problem with it, which I understand. And the main thing to note for all of your audience is all of this data is about averages in jobs. So for instance, software developer is lower than a lot of software developers like to think it should be. And then you describe it's the average. They go, oh, I get it. But I'm a software architect. Yeah, well, you're dealing with much more. You're not just dealing with the code. You're dealing with the customer. You're dealing with the economics of what you're building. You're dealing with a whole bunch of other things it makes it difficult to break it, to reduce it, because it's stitched across so many domains all at once.
I sent you a whole bunch of questions, so we're not going to get around to all of them. But there was just because anybody who's listened to you now is fascinated and mesmerized, and I'm sure you can talk hours on end and keep people fascinated because you have such a wealth of knowledge.
Too long.
But we only have a limited amount of time, so I want to make sure that we have to create a framework that people can follow. My function as the PM Cowboy is kind of to be the. Are you familiar with the term DAU? Mm-hmm. The dumbest assumed user. I call myself, when people say, well, your title is consultant and trainer, or what, I prefer the term PM Cowboy. I prefer the term Super DAU. And I love what you mentioned. You mentioned a key word, which I think is gone under a little bit, is the word humility. I think the good leaders, and that's some of the people we're trying to address here, people who are listening to this might be saying, hey, listen, I'm a decision maker. I feel the pressure from shareholders or from other owners that I need to do something. It's on my to-do list. I have to do something for AI. And I think a lot of them suffer under this classical study that Harvard Business Review has done several times that has established that the number one fear of executives is the imposter syndrome, which is pre-programmed. Okay, and I think that's actually a master skill. If you know what you don't know, and have the intelligence and the humility and the courage to ask the questions that might, some people say, well, those are stupid questions. I think some of the best questions in the world are the stupid ones, and that's kind of my role to ask the stupid questions. I don't really like the first question that I had sent you. It's kind of the classical, pragmatic question. If I'm a decision maker in a company, what tool set should I buy? I'm not a big fan of buying tools as a solution. I'm more interested in what's the overall strategy and focus. And you mentioned the fact that there's 895 jobs that are out there. I don't think most companies have a clear understanding of the classical what, where, why I'm even using the system for. Is there kind of a maybe a short or longer, however you prefer, kind of placating statement that you can give to our listeners who are decision makers out there on where the starting point is? How do they play the game? Because I think it's important to be on the field and be involved. Is there a minimum kind of entry-level recommendation you would give to executives to say, well, where do I need, how far do we need to be along in the maturity cycle of things?
Sure. I'll give you an answer which doesn't directly answer your question. Well, actually, it's twisted around a little bit. So
that's fine.
Here's why. The natural starting point is I don't think is that difficult. The hard part is not stopping there. Okay. So the natural starting point is, what can AI do? How can I actually use it in my organization? What tasks can I assign to it? Yeah. Can I delegate to it? Yeah. And how can I find efficiencies? Because this new technology can do lots of things. It operates in this massive, sort of combinatorial space. Its accomplishment, that's great. That's the starting point. That's easy to do. It's an efficiency play. It's what people hear from everything from their investors. They hear from Wall Street. They hear on CNBC. They hear from Davos, right? And I watched a fascinating interview with a CEO recently on CNBC, and the interviewer was just like, "You're not answering my question. What percentage of people are you going to fire?" And I'm like, well, that's really that's really simplistic, honestly. Because the starting point can't stop there. The thing that I think is that once you find those pockets of efficiency, the question is, what are you going to do with it? Because the genius of this is you've just made time. And one of the things that every human being pretty much, I think, would like more of is time. On a daily basis, monthly, weekly, our whole lifespan. We just like a bit more time. Now, when you ever find pockets of efficiency, why it's so special is because you're making time. Now, suddenly, I have an extra few minutes, hours, I've got a day, whatever it is, and across your world. So the question for leaders and the hard part is, okay, now your people have more time. What are you going to have them do with it? Now, there's some people who say, well, I'm just going to get rid of my people. Right? I can get the same amount done with fewer people. It's lower cost. And so therefore, I'm dropping more money to the bottom line. That's great. Your investors will applaud you for a quarter or two. And then they're going to turn around and say, okay, what's next? Where's your growth coming from? Those tools aren't going to tell you where the growth's coming from. And then especially not going to tell you anything different because they're the exact same tools that all your competitors are using. The only thing that's going to come up with new ideas are people, right? And the weird, messy group of people that you happen to have hired are the people that are going to come up with the new ideas. So sort of our ideas make time for what matters more. Now, what matters more totally depends on who you are. If you're an individual, what matters more might be that you suddenly have time to go home and spend time with your kids. You might have time for a second job, right? Like there's a lot of different things to think across an entire span of an economy of what matters to individuals. When you're dealing with leaders of organizations, well, is it because you, Allianz has publicly talked about how they have used AI to find more efficiency in their customer service channels, so that their
I hope
representatives
it's true what they claim, because there's often a big gap between what people think.
Yes.
Yeah.
Hope so too.
Yeah.
But what they've said is that their people spend more time with their customers, which is great. This is an organization whose entire brand is about trust. So, and we trust people in ways that we don't trust machines. So you want to talk to more people. So when you're dealing with an insurance product or financial product, it'd be nice to talk to more to a person, right? That's not totally new. It's exactly what happened in banking when the ATM came in, right? You had automated a transaction so you could spend more time sitting at the desk talking to somebody about your financial planning, right? So can you find, it could be spend more time with your customers. It could be spending more time thinking about innovations. It can be time that is actually programmed, or it could be time that's kind of wide open. The greatest innovations generally come in this sort of exploration time. There's been great studies about that, where you aren't under time pressure and you have the amount of time to sort of imagine something new. So back to your question, how do you get started? The first step is the easy, which is how do we actually free up and make time by using efficiency, but doing that wisely. But don't stop there. Don't stop there and go, gee, I don't need these people anymore. Try to figure out what those people can do that matters more.
There's two things that come to mind. One, based on what you said, I recently heard I think it was a YouTube video or it was an Instagram where somebody was talking. You know how I always find it funny when you're looking at social media, you have the one people who are telling you these fanciful stories of what AI is doing and is going to change the world, and you almost think it's possessed by some angelic thing that just creatively it talks to itself, it's going to reinvent the world and all that kind of stuff. And then you have the other side, the other extreme, where you have plenty of negative use cases, and two came to mind. One was Pizza Hut, where one of the franchisees that has 100 Pizza Huts is suing Pizza Hut for $100 million because they forced an AI system on him that was supposed to create exactly that efficiency you talked about. It failed exactly in that factor. He basically calculated his loss of revenue and said, screw you, you forced this upon me. This is I want my money back. Starbucks, another example. And I used to work in hospitality a long time ago in system and also hotel business. Starbucks had an AI system for their stores for inventory, right? It was supposed to count how much milk they had, how much syrup, how much whatever, right? And basically automate the whole process and create efficiency. Completely failed. And I was actually surprised by this because I didn't think the task was that difficult. But it started hallucinating about how much milk there was, and it was a total, as we say in the military, a foobar, right? Effed up beyond all recognition, and it was discontinued. And I'm not going to say now, I'm thrilled about that, and I think a lot of detractors from AI would say, good for that, it proves that. No, I'm with you. I think there's a lot of efficiency potential out there. And this leads me to the second comment I would give on what you said. Are you familiar with that spider diagram that kind of shows the scope of what we do right now? And it shows how much we do with AI, and it's actually just not that much right now. I'm a big proponent of the fact, based on my real understanding of operations, Right now, I absolutely agree with you. Employees do not have enough time to do everything they need to or want to do. Okay, we're just handicapped. When I do time management trainings, that's the first thing I start with. Let's get over the illusion that that you're gonna be able to do everything you want, right? You can do anything you want, but not everything you want, right? And I'm a big fan of the concept. If we really have a tool that we harness and we know how to control, because I think that's the other factor. My experience with AI is it's a wonderful tool. It helps. But if you're not experienced, if you don't have some real life experience and can't read through the results, whether it be code or text or whatever it might be, if you're not capable of double checking and refining it and adjusting it and adding your 2 cents to it or more than 2 cents, you're in a world, you're in for a world of hurt. And there's plenty of examples of that. Would you agree with that?
Sure.
Or?
Yeah, definitely. I think that some of the failures that you mentioned, a variety of different factors going on with both of those. But the one of the core challenges is leaders not recognizing what decisions they're making for people and what decisions they're making for machines. And they get things confused. They start to think of their machines as being able to be human and their humans as being able to be machines. So yeah, the machines can be quite good at a variety of things, but then there's a lot of things that they're actually just not very good at. And trying to get a machine to step in and to replace a human in something where you really need a human to do the job, either because it does have some irreducible complexity, or it does have something where you need a representative of your company to talk to another person. And the person just wants to talk to a person, because guess what? We've evolved to like talking to people. Yeah. And just because AI has shown up, our evolved being and our way of being collectively intelligent, that has made us into such an incredibly special species, that doesn't go away. And we don't suddenly want to just have a chat with a machine. The opposite is true as well. I mean, one of the core problems that happened, in retail broadly, Starbucks in particular, is they overloaded the people with too many management of machine decisions. So you end up with this, you got too many things that are happening, too many machines that are coming to you. You're trying to act as a barista, but at the same time, you're trying to manage all of these other things all at the same time. And you just get overwhelmed because they're trying to treat the human as if it's a machine. A machine can have lots of inputs happening in a very short cycle time. It does not fatigue, right? As long as it has power, it just keeps going. And as long as you don't clog up the memory or something else, you try and put too much through the bus. I know I'm sounding like a very old computer person. Then, it will keep chunking along. Yeah. That's not true for humans. That's not the way we work. That's not, and we shouldn't try to be machines. We should actually allow ourselves to be humans. So there's there's an abstractness problem that can happen with senior leaders, right? Yeah. They are some number of layers away from actual individual contributors. And the longer you've been that far away, the farther you are from really having that intuition for what that's like. And this is a time where it's not just a tool that says, well, this is a CRM system. It's going to manage all of our data. And that's going to be great because we're going to have one look at the customer. And isn't that going to be awesome? Great. That's generally worked, all that. This is different. You're bringing on an intelligence that has this sort of crazy way of sort of contemplating and thinking, and you're hiring essentially a whole bunch of new intelligences, and you're telling your current intelligences, all your people, well, figure out how to work with it.
Yeah.
No. As a leader, you actually have to step in there and try to figure out what that means.
Oh, now that would be my segue to the actual central theme of our talk, hopefully. I was recently at a workshop for a large company. I won't say what country because otherwise they know who I'm talking about. And there was a really engaged senior manager there who kind of gave a classical cheerleader speech, but kind of naive in the sense that said, hey, and he had like 40 engineers, hardcore engineers that work on like triple-digit million projects, right? And he said, yeah, you guys should just, we have some licenses, get some licenses, use Claude, use chat, use this, use that, and just get your feet wet and go out there and do something, right? And I was like, innerly I was doing this. I'm like, I appreciate his sentiment, but there's a lot of factors that he's overlooking. And thank heaven his team pushed back. And he said, yeah, but which tool? Which tool of the many tools? Because the landscape is large, number one. Number two, The pragmatic question is how. What exactly are we doing it? How are we going to do it? And not even to get into the governance issue, a classical thing. I just recently saw, I think it was in Germany, and this is not just in Germany, but I think some court of law in the United States declared anything that's shared on a LLM is public domain in a legal sense. That's a freaking nightmare for companies who are putting their data. If I'm saying, I'm going to respond to a request for proposal for a large project, and I just upload the request for proposal, that's public domain now, But this German company came up with some kind of in-between solution that uses Claude and ChatGPT, but creates a safe space. I think a lot of decision makers are not aware of the options and their responsibility in two things that I'm going to talk about, and I think the one is subordinate to it. Our central theme is the topic of design. Design meaning, do we have a concept of what we're using, how we're using, and part of a sub-factor of that design thing is also the governance and legal aspect of it. Can you tell our viewers a little bit why the design factor is so important in moving forward, no matter what stage of the evolution? Maybe also that you have a succession, a roadmap in the evolution. Why is design so important? And is it kind of in line with the whole overall design thinking mentality, or does it go beyond that? Those are a lot of questions now in one.
Yeah, no, it's great. So for me, design is how something works. So it has quite a lot of depth across any sort of product, but especially these in a different kind of way, because how the product works is both what happens when you click on it and it pops up on your screen. Since most of these are all software systems at the moment, although there are some that are just pure audio, all the way down to, what's the conversational design and how does that conversation happen? Most of what everyone has experienced in terms of new generative AI systems, in my mind, has not really been designed. And I don't say that to cast any shade on the designers who are at these large companies. I think, they're making these products as usable as possible so far. The challenge really comes is that what you experience today is kind of a general purpose technology and a window into it. It's like you opened up a web browser and there was nothing there except what would you like, and you had to sort of navigate yourself through to finding things. We've kind of gotten used to that with the search prompt. Which was sort of a derivative of the C prompt. If you remember back to the day when you had to find something.
I hated the C prompt.
Right? Exactly. But now we've gotten to this point where we now have basically a chat prompt, and it shows up and it generally says, "How can I help you today?" That's not very helpful to me. I understand it's like that's the best thing you can do when you have this sort of general purpose thing, but I have no idea what to do with it. I've learned over time what I like to do with it. There's probably a gazillion things that I have no idea what I can do with it because I just haven't gone down that path myself. And the system doesn't help you out in any way. It doesn't help you understand what you might want. It might not. It doesn't help you sort of corral its own intelligence into a space that based on when you say you want it. They do some of that in the software system and some of that in the model. It finds itself into some sort of space in its training data to help you out. If you're asking about, travel to Athens or something, it's going to be over in that sort of corner, not where it was thinking about, music from Brazil. So you find it sort of does it, but it's not very well structured. Which means that at the moment we sort of have this thing that the leaders of these companies say will someday be omniscient and be able to tell you absolutely everything, and which, by the way, will replace all of us, which is a ridiculous narrative. But they're focused on this thing being the know everything, which is in some ways why they call it artificial general intelligence, this sort of concept of AGI, which again is a ridiculous concept. But they want it to be that way, which is why they're structuring it this way. Our view is that there should be a much better way of designing these tools to help you figure out what you want to do, to both through the whole process. How do you actually think about creating it. Like how do we create a system where we're gathering humans and machine intelligence together for some purpose? Do you show up and declare that purpose, or do you choose a tool based on the purpose that you're trying to? How does it help you get through the purpose that you're trying to actually engage with it? How do you think about how you actually combine your intelligences and create something interesting out of it? To me, these are all sort of foundational design questions, and they're not easy to answer. We actually don't really have the language for what this means. Design has historically been something that is focused on reducing the number of problems or reducing the number of options in order to provide some level of certainty in terms of what you're trying to accomplish, whether that's how do I open a door, through to how do I create a spreadsheet, through to how do I drive my car and turn on the air conditioning, while the music thing is up. All of these things are around trying to help you actually accomplish something, which is about increasing certainty, reducing those options, providing better direction. At times, design is very constrained. I mean, you mentioned before my time at Apple. That was a time when never forget when we were trying to figure out how to make iPhoto. Steve was determined that we would only have 3 buttons on the bottom of the screen, which was extremely frustrating based on the number of functions that we actually wanted. But he was very focused on limitations to the number of options that might be presented to a customer, because the more options would be potentially more confusing. And as we were trying to do something brand new, here's software to manage photos that connects to a camera, had to be restricted. This world of AI is completely opposite, mostly. Now, there are great products that are actually much smaller, and most people haven't experienced them because they're little startups that are doing a much better job of actually providing more structured and interesting experiences, not constraining the capabilities, but actually helping you just figure out what you're supposed to do with the thing.
You mentioned the famous Steve, and I think he will go down in history as, I used the word DAU beforehand. He was an incredibly intelligent person. He wasn't always the nicest person from what I've read, but one thing he had the ability to kind of divine usability. He never lost that touch to think like a user.
Yeah.
And in a very pragmatic way. And I think it helped him that he was not originally a technically trained person. He always looked at it from the end user experience. And I think maybe we have generation upon generation that has kind of been spoilt in that sense, that we've gone through a period of technological development where other people came up with great ideas for. I mean, we kind of, through our buying power, decided what stuck and what didn't, or what technology stuck and what didn't. But let me get back to the design factor, because one of the factors I think that you also alluded to is right now it's in the hands of a few people, all right, who are by trial and error trying to fuddle their way through. I think I don't always have the sense that there's like a Steve Jobs who's very crystal clear on what the thing should do. I think it's more like trial and error. Let's see what works, and then we'll figure out a use for it, which is one way of designing something. My question to you, and this is one of my stupid questions that I keep asking, and I've gotten some answers to them, but I'm dissatisfied with them. I think LLMs are a great starting point. I think they're really just a starting point. If I think of some of my large clients, if I were those clients, I'm not 3-letter companies, I would say, who are these other companies dictating to me what the design of this model is and how it's used? And okay, it's one thing to be in the cloud, but now to be, there's a certain vulnerability to putting all your eggs in a couple baskets here. My question has always been, well, shouldn't a large company have its own LLM for legal and security reasons and for functionality reasons? Maybe that's too much. People say that's too expensive. But maybe from a different perspective, what's your take? Do you think that the future has that in store? Will we have a democratization of this technology where companies can more actively determine how this technology is used and how it's literally designed, also from its features? Mm-hmm. Do you foresee?
Yeah. I hope so. Let me quickly just give you, I'll tell you a bit of a story because it's, when you talk about passion journey, it was a key part of my passion journey. So while I was at Apple, Tuesday afternoons would be software review. And this was a conference table, the board table set up with however many machines were required, load software up in whatever status it was supposed to be in. And Steve would move from chair to chair. And you weren't allowed to tell him what he was looking at. You weren't allowed to preface him. Weren't allowed to tell him anything about anything. He had to sit, and he sat down very carefully, put his hand on his mouse. I can see it so perfectly. And then he just kind of start clicking and navigating around. And I always took away from that. And that's actually when people come to me and ask for, feedback and reviews on software. That's very much the mindset I take, because I think it's one of the most interesting things is to have the experience of someone with a beginner's mind every time looking at the software, because you find where the gaps are when they aren't told what to do. This is part of the era when we're shipping out Macintoshes without any manuals. We were trying to reduce paper. It was actually a lot about cost, but it was also about making it like, can you actually just start the thing and not have any instructions?
Is it intuitive? That's, I think, one of the brilliance of Steve Jobs.
And if those buttons don't make sense, you have something that pops up and tells you about it. But you have to. The only way you know that is when you start when you have a true beginner's mind reacting to it. And it was a different experience when we were dealing with professional tools, because that was a different world and so forth. But that was a very formative experience for me, and I take it through as every time I talk to somebody about their products. Now that's informative now, because I find that there's a big gap in terms of how the products, or at least when I receive them, what I feel is missing is part of the dialogue that's happening in the creation of them. Now, I don't have that inside view to know exactly how they're making decisions, but it doesn't feel to me like it's being designed with the beginner's mind in mind. One, it's being designed generally by extraordinary experts, people who understand how these tools function better than anyone outside of the companies.
Highly technical people.
Highly technical people. And their ultimate goal, in a large part, is not about making a tool that works for you and me. It's about making a tool that will replace you and me. So why do they care how it works? Now, I do believe that'll change, because you could say that there's a bit of an echo here of what the world felt like in the early 80s before, go back and pull up the Macintosh Super Bowl ad, and that hammer flying towards the screen was about breaking people from being chained into these desks and and that we were actually going to make computers for people. That's what it's called. The
computer for the rest of us was the slogan that stuck with me.
Exactly. Yep. And so finally that came out and people went, I want that. And it wasn't just take your Mac at home. It was the entire world of Microsoft and all of those sort of personal computers that flooded the entire corporate world as well. People wanted machines that worked for them as an individual, and in aggregate across an entire company, you wanted machines that would work for each of the individuals, because without individual humans, a company does not exist other than the book value of the assets that exist in a warehouse somewhere, right? So it was all about that and that amplifying of people. I hope that is the reaction we get from corporates, is that they look at it and they don't go, well, just use that tool and figure out what you can do with it. They go, well, how do I want to amplify my people? And are there any tools out there that do this work for them? Great. They might have to learn how to push and pull on these sort of standard products to do it. They might find smaller products that emerge. They might decide to make their own. Now, making your own is difficult and it is costly, but it is not. It's definitely not out of the reach of a lot of large corporates. I would say that I'm not thinking of them making their own foundation models. So, just for your listeners, there's a different kind of software stack that exists today. Yeah. When you're dealing with LLMs in particular, but also the image generators and so forth, is that there is a lot of what's called foundation models.
Yeah.
So underneath
there's a lot of things going in the background that we don't see and don't feel, but without it, it wouldn't work.
And you can build on top of Claude, the foundation model. You can build on top of the foundation model under ChatGPT, under a lot of these. There's a lot of open source models that are extraordinarily good. There are some that are specialized for doing things that the large general models don't do. But a software developer can build essentially the software product on top of it, sometimes called a harness, a variety of other things that actually can work with a single model or multiple models. That kind of level of software development expertise and expense is within the reach of larger companies. Small companies, not so much, but some people definitely build their own. There's a huge amount of advantage to that if what it is you want the system within your firewall, you want to operate and tune it on your own data, you want to do it, just make it something that operates differently, you want to have something where you're using a very small model and it operates on the edge because you want your people to be able to take their model with them on their phone and not actually connect to the cloud. You can do those things. We see some of this in startups where people are using these foundation models in interesting and creative ways. I love to highlight one of our advisors' companies, a guy named John Pasmore, created a product called Latimer. And he's built this on top of the other, on the foundation models. And what he's done is he's trained his system on data that is unavailable to any of those models that better represents Black and brown history and culture. So he's taken information through partnerships with HBCUs. It's a large catalog comes out of Temple University. He's done everything from taking things that have been digitized, but inside those organizations, but has not ever been made public on the internet, through to digitizing Frederick Douglass's letters that have never been digitized. And when you interact with Latimer, you get a very different experience than what you get from others. And it's been wildly successful especially across universities, where universities want to give students a variety of tools to work with. That work that he did as a startup, very scrappy, working really hard with a small team, that's within the scope of a large organization in terms of its capabilities. And you could look at it as just to say, well, you now have a tool that speaks like your company, right? Because it knows more about you than any other public system could.
I like what you're saying from a couple perspectives, because once again, I'm trying to channel within me the classical CEO who's like, yeah, I hear you, but I really don't only understand half of what you're saying. Maybe I understand a little bit more, but I think the classical question is that they have to face is, well, okay, what are two departments? What are two jobs that have definitely been impacted by this efficiency drive with AI? One is marketing departments. Sure. And the second one, although there's a lot of slop that comes out there too, and the second one is programmers. And sure. And what and I think you and I are both advocates for the principle. Listen, don't get rid of your resources. Just repurpose your resources and arm them with the technology. And what I hear you saying is, if I were an executive that had to make a decision, how do I need to plan midterm, long term? I'm going to throw this out there and you say whether you would agree with this. Would it be better to say, hey, listen, keep your people, make sure they fine-tune, that they learn as much as they can about the technology, and then come up with proposals to redesign it? Because there's a couple factors. One factor is with technology, the cost of development as we go forward goes down. Replication is part of what AI is doing right now, is going to make things even easier. I think there's a huge potential of democratization. And the other factor is large companies have the power to dictate to companies, hey, listen, we're unhappy with this, this, and this. I'm not going to use you unless you fix this, this, and this, right? Yep. I also heard you when you said, well, there's lots of foundational systems at the bottom of the internet and other interactions that we don't even know of. I was recently listening to one, I can't remember what it is, it's some deep stack or something like that. A normal person's never heard of, but the system, the internet and other things wouldn't even work if they didn't have. So what you're saying is that this will, what I think you're saying is that as we move forward, if companies open up to the AI prospects and learn the basics and keep an eye open and keep their IT staff on board and train them and focus them on how can we repurpose this so that it fits more into our business case, that's something that you would advocate for and believe in?
Yeah, I think so. I want to grab one of the things you said in the beginning of that, which was about the impact on jobs like marketing and programming, and how do leaders actually think through that. There is the natural idea that makes sense, which is, our programmers are 4 times faster, and so we don't need as many of them, right? Because they can get as much done. To me, that implies that you've solved all the problems that programmers could possibly solve, right? So the easy thing is to say, or maybe not easy, but the first step is to figure out, how do you actually help programmers, marketers, whatever other role it is, to be able to be more efficient and get more done. The next question comes in sort of twofold. The first step, or there's a 3-part step. One is, what are the things that you're not doing today that you'd like to do? Because actually, I think the people who feel that we can just automate all humans with machines, that's an unbelievable sort of hubris, but it's also unbelievable category error that we've solved all of the world's problems, which we just haven't, right? So think about that within your organization. What problems haven't you solved that you'd like to solve? What can you go deeper on that might provide richness to your organization, that might make it more satisfying, might make it more interesting for employees, which might make it better for customers, which might allow you to make more money? All of those things, whatever your motivation is, where are you not solving those problems? Marketers, I think what's interesting is that the world that I was in product marketing forever ago, it was a very personal experience in comparison today, because the internet basically didn't really exist as it does today. We couldn't do A/B tests. We couldn't look at how users were using our software because it wasn't connected to the internet, right? Like, we shipped products and then we had to ship updates and we had to go talk to people to figure it out. Maybe your marketers need to spend more personal time with people, because the richness of those conversations tells you some amplitude more than social listening across, social media channels, right? So how do you figure out what those categories are? And then the interesting part that we really like working with people on is thinking about, where in those problem sets are the things that you actually just want to let humans go be humans, right? I need some time. I got to go think. I'm going to come up with it on a walk somewhere. Like the true genius moments, like you can trace it, whether it was the idea when, for a products, like that I lived through, to like the invention of the Post-it, one of those sort of crazy moments, through to how do I actually use an AI to actually think of those crazy innovations and those growth ideas.
Oh,
that's
I love
a thing
what you're
that we
saying.
call co-op.
I love what you're saying. You're saying if it's kind of an open playground, but to enable your team to say, listen, here, use this because I think we're still pretty much at the beginning of this whole revolution. Use what you have and become creative and poke your fingers into different things and figure out what are use cases that might fit into our overall mission or business case.
Sure. And the intelligences that we're now using on our machines are fundamentally different than human intelligence. They're being designed and presented as if they're replacements for humans, because people are generally being just wildly unimaginative, and they're seeing a human as the design spec, which is kind of a silly idea when you understand how these tools actually operate, which is in some ways very limited in comparison to humans, but in other ways wildly more capable than humans, because they operate in this combinatorial space that we don't even understand. Way back in the beginning, when we first started teaching people about AI, which is like a dozen years ago, we talked about one of the core differences between machines, humans, and AI. Is humans, we think in 3 dimensions, maybe 4, if you can think about 3 dimensions over time. 5 dimensions, your brain breaks, right? Like literally. Whereas machines operate in essentially unlimited. They don't have the same
decision fatigue or.
Exactly. We don't tire. But we don't have the combinatorial, the way to be able to see across these things is amazing, which is why, just to break the sort of the sort of LLM model, think about how machines are able to understand climate or weather. The transformer, which is the architecture inside of these LLMs, has learned the patterns of the electricity grid. Right, Helen probably talked about that because she loves to talk about it. But it doesn't know the physics itself, but it's learned the patterns of. Right, that's how it's learned language. The fact that it actually has learned language is one of the greatest inventions of the century. So it sees and understands these patterns in ways that we don't. now. How do you stop and think, I get to work with this thing that sees and understands patterns in ways that I don't? How might that allow me to be more creative and think of new things, to be able to do new things, to expand the possibility of what I do as an individual, what we do as an organization? That's the great invention that we haven't gotten to. Like, we're still in the moment now of almost like 95, when almost every internet site was literally just a carbon copy or a digital copy of a company's physical brochure, right? You would take a brochure that you would have handed out on a trade show, and that's exactly what your homepage looked like. We haven't gotten to the how do we do this completely differently now?
I love what you're saying. I'm gonna rephrase it, because I think that the point needs to be driven home like a big stake even further. Your part of your journey into AI was your experience with your children. I had the same conversation with mine. Is why bother going to university, listening to a bunch of old white men talk about things that are no longer relevant if AI is going to do everything? And I think that's the original fear. What you are basically saying, and I would absolutely agree with you, is if we need to understand what the core functions and capabilities and features of AI are, and they don't replicate everything we need to be successful. I think what most people kind of overlook is, the last 20 years, almost all systems that have been sold on a major scale, SaaS systems, were based on big data. Right? And I, as the typical dumbest assumed user, used to always ask the question, what good is it to have 10 billion data points if you can't crunch it? Yeah. Nobody could answer that question, right? And now we have a system that theoretically could do that if we can extend our thinking. But it requires, if we're going to talk about design also means an active brain and a consciousness. And what you're kind of saying is this is what I'm hearing, or maybe this is what I want to hear. If we continue, it's not about replacing people. It's not about getting rid of employees. It's about getting better employees. And better employees means, actually, if I'm a decision maker within the company, I shouldn't start thinking about where I can reduce headcount. I need to be asking myself, how can I upskill them so that they can use these tools to our benefit? It actually means I need better employees, because also, if we go back to the whole issue, and I think this is all, I don't know if this is kind of a divine intervention from somewhere, what AI is concerned. I think this Achilles heel of somewhere the system going awry or some kind of slop coming out is kind of, I think, a divine intervention that says, listen, you're not off the hook yet. You can't just kick back and rely on this. This is not going to do the work for you. It'll help you. Is that kind of also what you're saying, is that not only we shouldn't replace employees, but we need to upskill them. We need better employees that are more capable so they can master their new tools better?
Yeah, I think that's fair. I think that we're working on sort of a different way of thinking about what upskilling means. And this is a very live process for us thinking about it based on the research that I mentioned, which, depending on when this comes out, but when we're recording it, was published yesterday. And this idea of irreducible complexity, because the traditional idea of upskilling is this is the function. And so I'm going to take people from, whatever it is, a rating of 1 up to a rating of 10. And there's some sort of skill level that you're going up. That's a lot of where the ONET database comes from, which makes sense because it's something that can be documented. And again, a huge, credit to the people who've created that system over many, many years. But it's now, in order to apply it to AI, it's a little bit different because it isn't sort of going up this linear scale. This is important for two reasons. One is the way that people describe whether an AI is better than a human or not is based on that same sort of scale, which is measuring humans almost like machines, right? Yeah. We take a test and there's a certain number of questions. So
reducing we start it this to IQ, which is not...
Exactly. And it's all reduced down to a number that's a linear scale, which is all about one single thing, not about how to apply that thing across the context of your life. That is actually where humans are really special, but it's extremely hard to measure. We've tried to do some of that in our irreducible complexity index, which is in this research. That's our first sort of stab at that to understand it. And that's one of the reasons why the perception of what you hear about how incredible these tools are and the benchmarks that are used doesn't make sense when you use it. Yes, this thing can compute something the way but it doesn't understand the context and the complexity of the world to be able to put it to use, so it can feel kind of dumb when you use it. That's the distance there. So when you think about a leader and upskilling, but I think there's something different now about helping humans understand the capabilities of this new intelligence they're working with. Now, we have some intuitions about how to deal with the intelligence of other humans we work with, because we've evolved to figure that out. Our knowledge comes from our community. We have literally evolved to understand, and I got a sense of what you know, Mark, and you now have a sense of what I know. If we worked together a lot longer, we'd have a much deeper understanding of what I'm relying on you on and what you're relying on me. All of that is, we figured that out for humans. We don't have any machine intuition, as we call it, for what a machine can do. So that's something you have to learn and be taught of what the capabilities are. But then you have to start also flipping them around and saying, so what is it that I bring to the table as a human? It's not going up that linear scale. It's about understanding the important context within the complexity of the world that you're around. Yeah. And the complexity of the world that you're in can be just yourself, because humans are complex systems ourselves. It's all of the people we work with, the organizations, the society, the planet. This is all a complex system where things emerge, and our job is to understand that emergent context and bring that to the table. It's just a different way of thinking.
What I'm also hearing here is you know what, if you want to be in the big girls and big boys club, if you want to be an executive, you have to be able to be comfortable with this new technology, even if you don't fully understand it, but not be so intimidated to do your job. I think there's a huge mandate for decision makers to use common sense, maybe also historical references to a certain extent would help. Maybe some liberal arts thinking would be good. Some principled thoughts about ethics might be a good. Strategy is of relevance. I liked what you said about the fact that I think that we need to redefine how we measure human performance. And if we understand that there's actually a symbiotic relationship between the two, I think that's where the real challenge is. I would say I think the big intimidating factors, and I always look at an organization, you can break it down into many different hierarchical levels, but I always basically the three basic ones. You have the strategic level, the executive level, then you have the tactical and functional level in between, and at the bottom you have the operational. I think what all of these three different levels are struggling with when it comes to AI is referenceable use cases, where people can say, can you give me an example of, I don't want to read another cheerleading book on AI of what I should be doing. I don't know what I want to know. Can you give me, and I just had a discussion with somebody today that somebody says, yeah, people don't want you to teach them how to prompt something. And I go, no, I totally disagree. Right now, we're at a stage where people literally want you to sit down and say, I'm going to, with all the blah, blah out there, let me show you one simple feature, and I'm going to show you exactly how to prompt it. I did agree with her that once you get your feet wet, once you learn how to use a stick shift, then you start experimenting, right? Or you might use a musical instrument as a better example, right? You need to know the fundamentals before you can get creative. What's your take on that? What the prevalence of use cases is? My feeling is that if we go back to the MIT study, that was a big hit not too long ago, where that says, 700 billion invested in AI, and only 5% or 3 to 5% of companies claim to get a return on investment. I think that's part of the dilemma of new technology. It's a little bit over the top. I think we're still learning by trial and error. What's your take? How could a company maybe save itself some of these lessons learned, or can they? Is there some kind of repository for use cases, or how does one develop? Does one just start off with basics? What's your take on that? That's kind of a lot of topics in one, but
There's a couple different things I'll pull apart. One is there's a temptation to see this piece of software like other pieces of software, and so you need to go through the training to figure out how to click things and how to create how do you use the function in Excel? How do you blah blah blah? What is a pivot table? Let alone how do you create one? Those kinds of things. Yeah. There's that level of understanding of these tools is very simple because it's a simple prompt, right? Yeah. You fire the thing up, you can type some things, you press enter, it comes back, and then you figure out what to do next. That sort of intro is helpful just so that people go, I'm not sure what I'm supposed to do with this piece of software. So you have to introduce them to the idea that this is having a conversation. For most tools, it's fairly simple and it's one kind of function. You may have some different kinds of entry points, like in Claude, you'll have chat, you'll have co-work, which operates on your machine, and you have code where you can code things and connect to your GitHub and so forth. So you have different entry points, but pretty much that's kind of what it is. Then beyond that, you get to this sort of question of, well, what do I do? Like, what kinds of things can I do with this thing? And the sort of satisfying and unsatisfying part is that's kind of up to the individual. It's like, depends on what your function is. It depends on who you are. It depends on how you like to work. Some people are extroverts and they like to talk a lot, and they like to think out loud. Some people are introverts, like they're best when they can go inside their office and close the door and get stuff done. Who they work with in the organization, who they might hire as a consultant to help them on a project will be different based on down to their individual personality, let alone the personality of their team or their company or their organization. So how you deal with this is very hard to standardize, right? So there's sort of a unsatisfying part of that as a leader, but it's also satisfying from you have to figure out how to empower your people and allow them to go experiment, figure it out. So we come up with sort of frameworks and structures for how people can approach these, rather than specific, sort of lists of use cases and prompts. The idea about how the sort of financial returns. There's long history of IT projects having some limit of financial returns. True with any kind of projects, right? Companies are trying things all the time and they fail. I believe that one of the problems with these tools is it's very hard to measure. So you're having a problem where it's not that whatever that number was, 95.5, and there were some challenges to how that was calculated anyway. It's not that 95% of them failed. It might be that 95% of them failed to be able to prove a financial return because you can't tie
a concept of a design or a process or a strategy to begin with.
Exactly. Yeah. So they're trying some stuff out, but they're not really sure what it is. They didn't really walk in and design it to say, this is how I'm going to change how my team functions, because I've now had 100 people, and now those 100 people are now powered by 100 machine employees. So I now have 200 employees, 200 humans and 200 machines. And this is how the system of people is going to be designed and work together. Therefore, I have a basis to start from and a basis to compare to. Right? They don't have that, so it's hard to measure. So we're still in that awkward phase of figuring out whether this stuff actually works. The easiest thing to measure is laying people off, which is why we keep hearing that narrative, even though the majority of people are getting laid off or not getting laid off for AI. They're getting laid off for other reasons, and people are using AI because it's the sexy solution to sell to their shareholders, and it stops their shareholders asking them what they're going to do about AI.
You travel the world and speak to a number of different people in companies. I've as an American with European roots and having lived in Europe a long time, I kind of sense the cultural difference and the different way that Americans do business. Although I wouldn't say that the present day is a good example of that exemplifies the better qualities of our American spirit, but. I think one could generalize that the U.S. strategy or attitude at the moment in particular is kind of the unregulated, just let it fly, don't worry about anything. Let's build something in Utah, even if we're creating a heat addition of 35 Hiroshima bombs with the new data center, and we're going to use up the little bit of water that's still left. I'm kind of doing the devil's advocate thing here. Whereas Europeans have more this let's take a look at it first. Let's see, do we have regulation? And of course, Americans look at the Europeans today. You guys are a bunch of slow losers. You have too many administrations, too much red tape. What's your take on that? What's your sentiment? What's better, or do both need to learn from each other?
Oof. Okay. We have how many? 3 more hours? There is definitely a distinct difference in how the U.S. is approaching this. I'd say that I've outside of the U.S. have the most comfort and understanding what's going on in different parts of Europe and in Australia, New Zealand, given the span of time that we spend in those kinds of areas. A couple of different things is there's a different I'd say in generalized, there's a different attitude between the value of labor and capital. So in the U.S., where the story is generally being driven by a labor replacement story by capital. So put a lot of capital into these companies, put a lot of capital into data centers. We'll make our money back by laying people off, basically getting rid of labor. That's where the monetary value comes from. So if you are part of the capital stack, if you're the ones who actually are putting in the equity or debt into these kinds of things, that's where you're going to capture value. That is something that is fairly unregulated here. I mean, the internet in general and technology companies are generally unregulated. I know there's some in the Valley who'll tell you that, the government is over-regulating because that sort of libertarian streak has gone bonkers. In general, most of those people are somewhere between mistaken and smoking crack, as far as I'm concerned. Yeah. It's words, exactly. They're just like, I don't understand where they're coming from. The opposite view is really quite different. So we actually just spent a good quality time in Europe. We'll be back again in the fall. We spent a lot of time with companies over there. Partially because our work and our message resonates, because they're trying to figure out what it means for labor. They're trying to figure out what it means for people. They're seeing that their society is structured around an organization of people. There is a higher understanding of large organizations like governments having a social contract and therefore having social services that are provided. And so they think about the way that government interacts and how corporates
we still have the concept of serving the people here. We the people still matter in Europe.
Yes. And so we can show up and say, hey, it doesn't have to be this way. It doesn't have to be about replacing labor. You can figure out how to use these tools, even as presented today, to do things that are advantageous for you. We can also push as individuals and organizations and countries on better designs. Now, yes, some will take a sort of a policy and regulation aspect. That's not our purpose. That's not the kind of nonprofit we are, but I love that they exist. For us, we're trying to inspire different designs by giving things that people actually really want. And so we see that the tools can be structured differently and they can provide better value for people. There are also things that we can envision in the future. It's not quite practical quite yet today, but things that'll be better for the planet. So you mentioned, data centers and the hoovering up of energy and water.
I think there's absolutely no restraint, no consideration.
No.
We're not willing to wait until we have a better technology for cooling. We just, just speed is
And we already have it better. Like we have renewable technology that can power these things. And both Helen and I spent a long time in the renewable space.
Yeah, I looked at your CV. I saw that. Yeah.
Yeah. So we know that we can power these things with renewables. We also know that closed loop cooling works. I know of some of the largest data center developers that are building data centers that have closed loop cooling in places like Florida and Texas because there isn't available water. That's something that can be done. And these companies have so much money rolling around that honestly, I'd love to see. Again, we're not a policy-oriented nonprofit, so we don't get involved in that. But I would love to see stronger regulation around the cooling systems because the technology exists. It can be better. Longer term, though, where we come in and where our design focus is, we're very interested in pushing more of the functionality to the edge. We have consistently seen throughout technology that more and more compute goes to the edge, to your computer, from the server, to your phone, from anywhere else, right? And we know that there's a lot more capability that will be coming. One of the things that will drive massive upgrade cycles to your phones is faster chips where the inference can be done on your phone. Inference being done on your phone means the inference isn't being done in the data center. That's not just good for the planet, that's good for you. Like I want my model operating on my phone because I've already made the social contract with my phone and with Apple to have all of my data. It has all of my contacts, my calendars, my texts with my wife, my emails with everyone I've ever worked with. All of that exists on my phone. If I could have an AI that could actually use all of that and remain on my phone and stay in my secure enclave, now that's a really compelling product. Now, we've seen some signals of where Apple and Google are going. There are small models they're working on. They are working on data privacy and security. I actually believe that the greatest unlock in terms of design and usability will be putting more of this on the phone. That will also be one of the best things that we can do in terms of the trade-off that we're struggling with between AI and the planet.
I think you mentioned something. The key word there is the trade-off. I think that the ship has sailed. I think the next and every new generation is more susceptible and more open to it. We're going to know everything about everybody at some point. But I think the question is who has access to the data and for what are we using it? I think it's and there's huge potentials to it. From a health perspective and from legal perspective and stuff like that. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, because you want a lot of that data to be secure, whether it's your passwords or the data feedback that's off of my Apple Watch or off of an Oura Ring. You need that to be just you. And so there's sort of where does all of this context that the AI models work with? On what side of that privacy line do we want it? Right now, it's on the wrong side for me, but I can see how it can get to the right side.
A real example that my wife's a doctor, so we were talking about this with friends of ours yesterday, and they're from Germany, and they were saying, you know what, if he goes to one doctor and he gets his blood taken, there's not a central system where if he goes to another city and there's an emergency that people can access. And I'm going to tell you, in the sense of government efficiency, one of the big challenges is one of the big bills that we have to pay is health insurance. I believe it's a human right. And I'll stand by that. I've been in Europe for way too long to believe anything else. And it's doable, but there's a huge amount of efficiency that comes in there. And the problem is they don't have these central systems. There needs to be that level of transparency. That would be an example where AI could be a huge help, that we have, that doctors, you can go to a doctor anywhere in the country or maybe even outside the country and still get, they'll look up your history and stuff like that. And maybe even from a preventative perspective. I'll allow you to plead the fifth on this one if you want to, because I know that you're nonpartisan or you don't want to get involved in politics. One of the topics that keeps coming up in Europe as well is, and I think it's also an issue in the United States, I don't think it's an issue during this term, but I think there's going to be a big shift coming soon, and the pendulum is going to swing in the other direction. There is some discussion whether or not AI is such an essential system for humanity, whether it should be in private hands or whether it should be in government hands. You want to plead the fifth, or you want to make some kind of statement there?
It's a tough one. So I know that there's some legislation that's been discussed or publicized just recently about the public or the government in some sort of form having ownership of the large AI labs, etc. So I appreciate the concept, that this is something that is big enough that maybe we should have ownership. I think that there's a couple things going on. One is I really don't know how you define it.
Yeah. It's a huge gray area.
It's a real gray area. Yeah. So not to poke at my friend John, but you think about Latimer, it is an AI system that you experience. The foundation model underneath it is something that comes from somebody else. He is built on top of it as a service that actually is then deployed to the public and including lots and lots of students. Is that something that the public should own, or is that something that the public shouldn't own? And I don't know where, because it gets really messy. When it's a software system, think about, Notion or Zoom even, that we're sitting here on, pops up and there's a little thing that transcribes and it's using one of these language models behind the scenes. Is that, where's the level that you cut it? And I think that I worry that actually we just get bogged down in that difference.
It would kind of require a higher level of understanding on a government side if they would take that responsibility. And I think we're far away from that.
So I find that, but then I find myself thinking, well, these are companies that are becoming extraordinarily wealthy and individuals that are just off the charts wealthy based off of the backs of things that we all created and we allowed the world to see. And so there's something fundamentally unfair that I think is real. I mean, everything we've ever written, Helen and I have ever written, got absorbed. Recently, we've actually put a lot of our most important work behind a registration wall. It's free. We are a nonprofit, but you have to actually register with us. By the way, if you do that, you can turn off your emails. It's okay. And we're not trying to hoover that up. We're actually just trying to make it that our most important work is for human eyes only, not for machine eyes, if you will. So we think about that unfairness. I think that if these large companies are driving towards labor replacement, and actually they still have these ideas that they're going to put large percentage of the population, whether it's in our country or other countries, there's another thing that we don't really talk about is all of the impact on the outsourced world that has actually, does a lot of labor for countries in North America and in Europe. They're all losing a lot of employment too. But wherever that employment is getting replaced, that becomes a really significant issue for governments and regulators. And I don't have a good answer, but it's certainly not something that we should
I would
ignore.
maybe add a sentiment. I agree with you. I don't think that we have the capability. Government doesn't have the capability to keep from a cognitive perspective to keep a handle on it. I think it would be beyond the scope of their thing. But I do believe I'm a big fan of a book called Germs, Guns, and Steel, or in some order of that, where there's a quote. There's one paragraph, and that made me smile when I read it. And they said the function of government is to be the biggest, baddest gang in the country. Okay, so if you have to pay protection money with tax money, right? It's the government. Is the government serving the people, or is it serving corporations? And I have a very distinct opinion on that. I think I don't think governments should necessarily own it, but I think all companies should be subservient when it comes down to it. Okay, yes. The biggest, baddest person in should be the government, and they should represent the people and not private interests.
And I'll add to that, which is I think that in the idea that if people are thinking about the role of government here, and if there's people in governments that are, listening to this, I would encourage them to spend some time with the work of Jeff Mulgan, who is a prof at University College London, Sir Jeff Mulgan, who's a friend of ours. He does brilliant work on helping people imagine new institutions. So just as we think about how our current institutions and our current governments should be responding to AI, I think we have to ask how those institutions might need to change and evolve themselves in order to handle the new realities. And I think that Jeff does a fantastic, as someone who's spent time inside the UK government, right? So he's not an anti-government person. He's how do we reimagine institutions to be able to handle new realities? There's a lot of really interesting work and writing that he's done. So if you're interested in that sort of positive solution,
I'm going to piggyback off that, just like I piggybacked off Helen. Would you put in a good word to him for me?
Sure,
I would love to have him on.
Of course.
Exactly. On that topic.
He's fantastic. He is a dynamic speaker. We've had him on. He came out to our summit in Oregon
I'm
last year.
hoping to come out sometime. I don't know whether I managed it this year, but sometime
we're hoping that Jeff will come back again this year as well to be able to help keep that idea rolling along. And we will, by the way, hopefully by the time this comes out, I'll finally get the video of his talk up on our YouTube channel.
Good.
So people can listen and get a sense of the the kind of vision that he can paint.
Yeah. I have to look out for your time. I have two, and we've gone a little bit off script, but I think we're still good.
Hope so.
There's I definitely feel so. There's one populist thing I want to talk to you about, and then one maybe leadership factor. The one is, I'm sure you've with a certain sense of humor, looked at some of the YouTube videos that are out with graduation now. Anybody who uses the word AI is literally booed off stage. I think there was even one comedian who intentionally said AI several times just to rile the crowd.
Just to wind people up.
I think AI definitely, and I think it's good. I think it's a form of self regulation. I think AI with a young crowd really has a PR issue.
Sure.
Yeah. What's your take on that? What needs to happen so that
Well,
because they're ultimately going to be the ones who decide whether we adopt or not.
Yeah. Oh, of course. They'll be the ones who decide if we adopt. They'll be the ones who decide how we adopt. I actually look at the generation that's graduating now as the group who's going to figure out the right answer for all of this. First, I'll start with the PR problem, and then where I find some hope. The PR problem is that the major AI companies have been out there saying that they're gonna make all of this money by replacing labor. That's not an attractive thing for people graduating. We have 5 kids.
I don't know how many $100,000 of debt.
Exactly. We have 5 kids. Only one of them is still now in college. We had the 4th one just graduated. They're all in this very difficult timeline of trying to find a job, trying to figure out their life, and they're in a tough economy in terms of new jobs for new graduates. And so anybody who comes along and says, my greatest thing is going to make sure that is going to cause 30% unemployment, of course they're going to get booed. They're idiots to actually stand up and say anything like that. So that narrative is changing slightly. It's interesting to see that, Dario Amodei at Anthropic has now come out and sort of shifted his tone about unemployment.
He's hanging out with the Pope.
As Helen and I said publicly, my take on that is that the investment bankers told him that he couldn't stop saying that he was going to crater the economy if he's trying to go public. I know the capital markets guys he's working with, because I used to work at Morgan Stanley long ago. This world is, you're not going to be very popular to investors. They're not going to want to buy your IPO if you're saying you're going to destroy the rest of the economy, because the rest of their portfolio is bigger than your stock. So I think there's a bit of a narrative change happening there. We hope that our work, 2 points of hope. One, we hope that our work actually shifts the way these products are designed, so that people who are trying to find jobs, who are trying to find their place in their careers, who are trying to recover from a layoff. Let's not forget that this is not just about new graduates. This is about mid and late career people who've been laid off and they're trying to figure out their next world. We hope that our work helps them understand how to use the tools, but also helps change the nature of the way these tools are designed, so that they will more naturally work for people, not against them. The last is, despite the fact that, I've had some pretty good, ideas about products over my life, it's most likely that the real breakthrough is going to come from somebody who's quite young. So I had a great conversation with a friend of ours, Chris Messina, who is at our summit, but that's not his most famous thing. He's actually the guy who created the hashtag for Twitter, right? And when we discussed this with him on our podcast a long time ago, I asked him where he thought the nugget would come from. The hashtag was this tiny little thing that totally opened up social media. Sync was the tiny little thing that made iTunes. Yeah, and the sync was the tiny little thing that connected iTunes to the iPod, completely blew open the whole idea of devices, right? And we used it across all the different devices. And I said, where do you think that's going to come from? He said, don't ask me. Ask somebody who's 14. Because that's where he was sort of paralleling how old he was at the time when the idea came up, right, later. So, and I think he's totally right about that this is something where someone who is currently quite young, who's going to come at this world from a much more of a native perspective, that's where it's going to come from. I hope that it's somebody who's older than 14 now, because I'd like the answer to come sooner, right? To have it work.
We need it sooner.
But I think we actually have to find a way for the younger people who are thinking more natively about this, who don't have the baggage of all of the way things have been done, who are going to show up and go, oh wait, I can figure out how this can work for us. Let me. That's where that great new thing is going to come from.
One of the things I've written down several times when you were talking is we've referenced Steve Jobs several times, and once again, I'm not going to judge him as in his personal life. I know that he was sometimes not always the kindest person, but I think everybody externally knows his good qualities in the sense of being a sensational visionary. I love the fact when everybody was divesting from laptops, he was the one who said, screw you, a laptop doesn't have to cost $600 and I'm going to do it differently. I just love the fact that, and what I really loved about Steve Jobs is he couldn't give, excuse my language, a rat's ass what other people thought. If he was convinced that this was in line with the user, he was going to make it happen. And I think it resonated with the user. If we look by contrast, some of the representatives that you kind of alluded to already, we're looking at, I used to think, we used to watch James Bond movies and we used to thought these Bond villains were ridiculous. And like, how is it ever going to be that there's a private person who has so much money that they can basically leverage the world into whatever? We thought that was, we used to watch it and say, oh, this is fun to watch, but we never thought it was realistic. We've actually got people who've got the psychological profile of sociopaths and psychopaths running some of these companies, or they're habitual liars. If we're talking about the guy with the A at the beginning of his name, right? I think it's always been proven in court. If we're going to use these two things, let's go back to the CEO who might be listening to this. What would be the cheerleading sentence or thing that we can say? Listen, be more like Steve Jobs and less like Altman or any of the other ones. How should decision makers or people who might become decision makers, because it might be somebody who's in the wings, who's not in an executive position right now, what should their mind frame be? If we were to say, I don't know if it's in 5 years down the road or 10 years down the road, how do you create a vision where you can say, we got it right? Yeah, I don't know if that's a distinct enough question to be able to answer, but it's kind of.
Sure. Well, I'll stick with the Steve reference since you asked it. I'll say one caveat thing, which is the legend of Steve is not actually was not the lived reality. In that, sure, he was a passionate guy and he let that show a lot. But he was also one of the kindest, most thoughtful, people I've ever come across. Right.
Okay.
So I had personal experiences of both ends of that spectrum.
Okay.
But those will go with me in my files.
Good for you.
For my children to inherit. But I guess the one thing to think about, I think, with Steve, the guiding principle is that he always made the customer the hero of the story. Go back to every single pitch that he ever made, every presentation he gave, when he stood up on stage and he introduced the product was not the hero. Apple was not the hero. He wasn't the hero. He was making the story that you, as the user, were going to be the hero of your own story.
And you felt that when you walked into an Apple store.
You felt it. You walked in and you're like, I'm going to use this to be, I'm going to make myself into being a hero by buying this. Now, it was a commercial thing. You had to buy the phone or buy the Mac and you had to do all that, but it was in service of making you the hero. So if you're a leader today and you're trying to figure out your AI strategy, start with the premise of how are you going to make your employees and your customers the heroes of the story with this AI. If you're doing anything else, then you have to stop and ask yourself whether it's worth it. Like you're actually denying people's capability of being the hero, which means at some point there's a villain. And guess what? If you're not making them the hero, you're probably the villain. And is that worth being the villain of the story? And sometimes you have to be. It's a hard job as a leader. Sometimes you have to deliver the hard.
You have to stand for something. To know what the deeper meaning of something is.
Sometimes you're the villain, and that is just what it is, because the world's hard and you got to do it. But you have to make sure it's worth it. Yeah. But I think too many people are drifting into this story, and they're not thinking about the fact that they're making themselves out the villain of the story. They're not, because they're not focused on who the hero really needs to be.
We have to watch out for time, but there's one sentence on your website that really jumped out at me, and I want to kind of share it with the listener and the viewers. The Artificiality Institute exists because we believe you can become more human through AI, not less, but only if you navigate the transformation consciously. And I think that is a good kind of short summary of the conscientious and activated self-deterministic attitude that you have to have as an organization. Yes, a lot of things are coming down the pipeline that you don't have a choice over, but you still have a choice on how you design it, still how you use it, how you implement it, and what principles you use. I think that's the overriding positive message that I hope that our viewers took from this engagement that we had here.
Thank you.
What big things have you got planned in the near future?
Let's see. Well, our summit is the number one thing of the year. So we bring
it's
together.
It's coming up in October, I think, right?
October 22nd to 24th in Bend, Oregon. It's a small group on purpose to focus on the big ideas and the big pictures and to come together to imagine a hopeful future.
How do you get an invite to it, or just with invitation?
It is open. It is open, so anybody can sign up and join us.
Is it kind of like Burning Man? You've only got limited tickets, and when they're gone, they're gone?
When they're gone, they're gone. Our space is limited to 150 people. We actually focus on that so that it is an incredibly immersive and engaged experience. So this isn't a speaker audience. We have people on the couch, literally, rather than a stage, and everyone else is in a sort of a big U in a circle. You can see pictures of the environment and the space, and it's for people to come together and to engage in discussions among everyone. But it is a place where people leave. They say, this is not your normal conference. They say, I finally met my tribe. They say, this keeps me going all year. That's the idea, because we think we need a world with more hope. So that people have an idea of where we should be going.
One last thing, for those people who say, hey, how do I get a hold of you? You and Helen are bookable, right?
Yep, we are. You can find us at artificiality.org.
I'll put the link down below, and I'll sing your praises
all the
wherever
social
I can.
channels that Helen seems to have been able to touch a nerve and find a lot of people who want to hear what she says. We'll be doing more of that together on YouTube, longer form stuff soon. But just reach out. We're easy to find.
And I'll hit you up about Jeff.
Great.
Okay.
Thank you.
Listen, Dave, we almost have a point landing. We're 1 minute over. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you so much for your brilliant insights. Maybe we can do a follow-up somewhere down the line. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Okay. Bye-bye.